Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the University of Sydney. I'm Mark Scott. I'm Vice Chancellor and President here, and I'm delighted to be able to welcome you to the 2026 Michael Hintze Lecture, which Peter Katzenstein will be delivering shortly. But a few words at the beginning. Firstly, can I acknowledge traditional owners on the land in which we meet, the Gadigal people. We reflect on the fact that this university has been going here for the best part of 2 centuries. Traditional owners have been teaching and learning and discovering here for 600 centuries, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this annual Michael Hintze Lecture is a flagship event for the Centre for International Security Studies, the CISS, and the lecture dates back to 2006, when the CISS was established by a founding grant by the Hintze Family Charitable Foundation, with the intent was to produce innovative research and education programs on the enduring and emerging security challenges facing Australia, the Asia Pacific and the world. And I was saying to Lord Hintze tonight, is there a more appropriate time for us to be gathering and listening to experts and thinking through these complex issues than the days that we are living through right now? We're delighted to have with us Lord Michael Hintze, and thank you for your early support and for joining us for the lecture tonight and for helping us mark the 20th anniversary of the Centre. The CISS, as is the case with all things at the university, has evolved with the time. Several new initiatives, including the Global Forum on Future Insecurity, Project Q on the strategic and ethical implications of quantum innovation, and the Global Media Project that's produced feature documentaries. And we're delighted to have with us tonight our keynote speaker, Professor Peter J. Katzenstein, who brings his insights on the uncertainty and entanglements, as he calls it, of today's world politics. We're not sure if the speech has needed to be redrafted in the last 72 hours, but it's wonderful to have Professor Katzenstein with us. He'll be introduced shortly by Professor James Derian, but it's my pleasure now to introduce Lord Hintze to speak to us. He's a distinguished alum of the University of Sydney and St John's College. He studied physics, pure mathematics and electrical engineering here, completed postgraduate studies at the University of New South Wales and Harvard Business School, and has received honorary doctorates from both the University of Sydney and UNSW. Never let it be said we can't work together, these great universities in our city. But his professional career, he's had a lasting impact on the international financial sector, and his philanthropy has enabled transformational research here through the Charles Perkins Centre and a range of other innovations as well. He has many honours, including being a Papal Knight of the Order of St Gregory, a member of the Order of Australia, and a knighthood for services to philanthropy and the arts. And in 2022, he was granted a life peerage by King Charles III and now sits in the House of Lords as Baron Hintze. Will you join me in welcoming Lord Hintze to speak to us tonight?
Again, thank you so much, Vice Chancellor. I have prepared a speech, which I will actually deliver if that's okay. But I hope to goodness I don't want to take time away from our main speaker, who's frankly a wonderful and thoughtful individual. So I think we'll anyway. If you bear with me, let me go for it. Right, Vice Chancellor, distinguished guests, colleagues, students, ladies and gentlemen, it's with great pleasure and profound honour to join you this evening to mark 20 years of the Michael Hintze Security Studies Professorship at the University of Sydney, and to do the pre-speech to the Hintze Lecture. 20 years is certainly a long enough time for the idea to prove its worth. It's long enough to see whether the foresight was justified. And in this case, I believe unquestionably it was. This initiative began because 2 extraordinary men, the Vice Chancellor Gavin Brown, mathematician, and Chancellor Kim Santow, God rest both their souls, who is a very distinguished lawyer, believed that Australia needed something it did not yet fully possess: a serious, sustained intellectual capacity in security studies, anchored in one of its great universities. As I said, both gentlemen are no longer with us. A huge sadness to see them go. But their clarity of thought and sense of national responsibility remained with us. They approached me with a simple but compelling proposition that the University of Sydney should not merely teach international relations, but should build a centre of gravity in security and geopolitics. One that would shape national debate, inform policy, and train future leaders. They asked me to help make that possible. I was very happy to do so. I confess that I was initially reluctant to attach my name to the chair, but Gavin and Kim were very persuasive, very persuasive. They argued that attaching a name was not about vanity, it was about signalling commitment. It would demonstrate that major philanthropic support for the University of Sydney was again possible and desirable. Many of you will know that the university once had been a powerful tradition of endowed chairs through things such as the Chalice legacy. But when tertiary education became free, and I'm not sure there's ever such a thing as free in this world, became free, fundraising efforts were understandably put aside. Over time, the culture of major giving faded. It really did fade. In fact, one of the first gifts I gave to the university was to establish a list of alumni. Can you believe they didn't know where to find anybody, right? The university endured a long drought. This professorship was one of the early signs of renewal, not only an investment in security studies, but a signal that the university was prepared once again to combine public mission with private initiative. Public mission with private initiative. And I think that's where the world is going now. I'm told, and I take quite satisfaction in this, that the existence of the chair helped catalyse other initiatives, including the American Studies Institute, which we've got here, and beyond. But philanthropy was never the core issue. The core issue was necessity. 20 years ago, we were still intellectually living in the optimism that followed 1989. After the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, many believed that history had turned a decisive corner. Liberal democracy appeared ascendant, economic integration accelerated, supply chains lengthened across continents, just-in-time logistics became doctrine, efficiency replaced redundancy, strategic risk was often discounted. The prevailing assumption was that trade and interdependency would reduce conflict. But history did not end. And they probably should have actually looked at what happened in the First World War. But anyway, that's another story. Terrorism reminded us that the ideology could still shape violence. Financial crises exposed fragility beneath global integration. Cyber conflict emerged as a new domain of power. The pandemic revealed the vulnerability of extended supply chains, and war in Ukraine has demonstrated with brutal clarity that territorial aggression and hard power remain central to international affairs. And I wrote this prior to some of the things which we've just seen anyway. We now live in a period of renewed strategic competition, particularly in the Indo-Pacific, which has become the center of global economic gravity and geopolitical tension. In Australia, we are, believe it or not, in my view, a major center of the world. It is here that Australia finds itself not at the margin, but at the center. And before I speak further about that, may I help explain why the subject matters to me personally? Geopolitics has shaped my entire life. It's not an abstract discipline to me, it is lived history. Lived history. My grandfather fought in the White Russian cavalry as a very junior subaltern during the Russian Civil War. He was wounded, fortunately, and made his way to Vladivostok, where in 1922, amid the collapse and the upheaval, he finished a degree in Far Eastern languages. That led to his working in China for the Liddell Brothers, the British trading company, which in 1949, and when 1949 came and political order changed, that enterprise was effectively destroyed. He came to Australia to join his brother Victor and began again. He invested, and here's the rub, in Dutch New Guinea. And again, politics intervened. The territory was absorbed into Indonesia, and he lost everything, and I mean everything, once more. On my grandmother's side, my maternal grandma came from Volga region. They too lost everything in the revolution. Everything. I mean, it's really quite bizarre. My maternal grandfather was a businessman in Harbin, which is where I was born, and he built a life and enterprise there. And when the war ended and the Russians came, again, everything went to hell. Everything was swept away. So when I speak of geopolitics, I do so as someone whose family history was written by it. Borders shift, regimes change, policies alter the fate of nations, and nations, and for that matter, of families. Governments, through their decisions, can create prosperity, but man, oh man, can they extinguish it. And they do, by the way. If one wishes to understand how wealth can disappear, how security can evaporate, how stability can collapse, one must understand geopolitics. Security is not the opposite of prosperity. It is its foundation. And that is why this chair mattered to me. The first holder of this professorship, Professor Alan Dupont, established a tone that was outward-looking, policy-generated, engaged, and serious. He ensured that security studies, he would not be insular or purely theoretical. Professor James Derian, very eminent worker in the field of geopolitics, has built upon that foundation, created a vibrant research community that engages government, industry, and academia. The Centre for International Security Studies has grown into a meaningful contributor to debates on cyber conflict, emerging technologies, hybrid warfare, and strategic risk. We should be very proud of what James has done for us. He's really, in my view, moved the debate on significantly. In today's world, security is no longer confined to military doctrine. It encompasses cyber resilience, energy systems, maritime security, space capabilities, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, rare earths, and the resilience of supply chains. And if you ask James, I'm sure I've missed probably half a dozen, if not more. Right? It encompasses economic statecraft. Big deal. Economic statecraft. Economic statecraft is a defining feature of our era. The control of technology, access to critical minerals, resilience in advanced manufacturing, digital infrastructure, and energy transition. These are instruments of national power. National power. Trade is no longer merely commercial, it is strategic. And again, you can see what Donald Trump's trying to do with various, successfully, not successfully, with his world tariffs mistake. But anyway, that's another story, right? And it's particularly true in the Indo-Pacific. From my vantage point, the United Kingdom, where I'm now based, from my vantage point in the United Kingdom, where I'm now based, it is striking how central Australia has become to global strategic thinking. Australia is not seen as peripheral. It is seen as pivotal. Australia understands Asia. It is geographically Indo-Pacific, but it is institutionally Western. It is economically connected to China. It is allied to the United States. It is deepened India, Japan, Southeast Asia, Europe, CPTPP. I mean, we can go on. Australia is a big deal. And in this context, AUKUS stands out as a remarkable strategic innovation. Pillar 1, the nuclear submarine program, represents a generational commitment to deterrence and maritime stability. It is visionary in scale and seriousness. But Pillar 2 may prove, in a sense, will prove more transformative. Pillar 2 recognizes that technological superiority will define strategic advantage. Cooperation in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, advanced cyber capabilities, undersea systems, hypersonics is not simply defense collaboration. It is the creation of an integrated innovation ecosystem across trusted partners. It links academia, industry, government. It integrates strategy with science. It aligns national security with economic capability. From London, one sees clearly how significant this is. Australia is not simply participating. In many respects, it is driving momentum, demonstrating seriousness of intent, and committing real resources. This is leadership. This is also realism. Let me now turn respectfully and diplomatically, I hope, to China. China is a civilization of immense depth and sophistication and age. Right? Its economic transformation over recent decades has been extraordinary. Hundreds of millions have been lifted out of poverty. It reemerges as a major historic, its reemergence as a major power is historically understandable. It will remain central to global affairs for generations to come. The challenge is not to deny this reality, nor to dramatize it unnecessarily, but to manage it intellectually. To my view, three principles must coexist. First, stability through credible deterrence. Balance reduces miscalculation. Second, competition. Economic, technology, and intellectual competition within rules, with norms, is legitimate and inevitable. Third, cooperation. Let's not forget about that. Climate change, global health, financial stability, non-proliferation, these challenges remain important and require engagement. Containment alone is insufficient. Competition alone is destabilizing. Cooperation alone is naive. Statecraft requires managing all three simultaneously. That requires disciplined thinking. It requires institutions capable of sustained analysis beyond political cycles. It requires universities. It requires universities. For students here tonight, you will live your professional lives in a world defined by the Indo-Pacific. You will face technological transformation, geopolitical rivalry, and strategic complexity, but you will also live in an era of extraordinary opportunity. Extraordinary opportunity. Australia is not a bystander in this century. It is a shaper of it. For policymakers, intellectual depth is strategic infrastructure. Intellectual depth is strategic infrastructure. For academics, for the academics here, engagement with real-world challenges strengthens scholarship. And for me personally, the University of Sydney and St John's College within it were critical to my own development. They provided not only education, but community, discipline, debate, and lifelong friendships. They shaped how I think, how I question, and how I engage with the world. And by the way, I suspect some of that is at risk, but it is important. For 20 years ago, my two visionary leaders believed that Australia needed deeper capacity in security studies. They were right. Today's security underpins prosperity. Stability underpins opportunity. Strategy underpins sovereignty. Strategy underpins sovereignty. I'm proud to have helped begin the journey. I'm proud that the University of Sydney has nurtured it. I'm proud of St John's College and the role it played in shaping me. And I'm proud to be a graduate of this great institution. The next 20 years will demand resilience, clarity, courage, and imagination. Don't forget imagination. I have every confidence that this university and the Hintze Lecture will continue to provide all four under the leadership of James Derian. Again, thank you very much. I hope I haven't taken too much of your time.
Thank you very much, Lord Hintze, and thank you, Vice Chancellor, for the kind words and your support, and thank you all for coming out. I mean, even before the news of this weekend, this lecture was oversubscribed, and now we know reasons why. We need people like giving your support, but also someone who can speak to these issues. Today, Professor Katzenstein, who's the Walter Carpenter Jr. Professor of International Studies at the University of Cornell University, will be speaking to the question of entanglement and uncertainty, the power of uncertainty. And it would take too much of our valuable time to even scrape the surface of the remarkable achievements of Professor Katzenstein with over 40 books, 100 articles and chapters to his name. But I just want to note for those who might wish to dive deeper into this topic that this lecture represents a trilogy, this last book in the trilogy that digs deep into the question of protean power. And for those who are not familiar with this term, protean comes from Proteus, the Greek god, the prophetic and shape-shifting god of the sea, who, unlike all the other Greek deities, he could not help himself. He could not help himself, no matter the cost, but to tell the truth about the world as he sees it and experiences it. And these are qualities that Professor Katzenstein not only writes about, but embodies. These protean qualia have placed him in the top academic pantheons in the United States, but also around the world: the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Philosophical Society, and the British Academy. He holds 6 honorary degrees, and he's a recipient of several international prizes, including the highest in political science, the Johann Schutte Prize. And today's lecture, I think, will give testimony to these achievements. It's informed by an eclectic mix of really deep thinking, critical ideas, and novel stories of understanding an age of uncertainty. I should also tell you that Winnie the Pooh makes a couple cameo appearances, I believe. Is this true? At least it was in the book. After the lecture, there will be a moderated short discussion, but then we want to hear from you in the question and answer period. And with that, please join me in giving a warm Sydney welcome to Professor Katzenstein.
Winnie actually is a central character, okay? Hard to beat Winnie the Pooh. I would like to thank James and the Center of International Security Studies, Mark, as Vice Chancellor, for inviting me to give this. I didn't know it was a 20th anniversary lecture. I gave up a wonderful winter of skiing to come here to warmer climates. So, Lord Hintze, my odyssey, I live in Ithaca, so my odyssey took me this morning to the Australian Museum, where I learned from your boyhood that we are curious. I think we all are. It is the species. We are a knowledge-seeking species. So that I learned in Hintze Hall. But adjacent to the hall, in one of the exhibits, there's an inscription high up. Nobody looks up. They all walk underneath. And the inscription reads, "We shall be defined not by the smallness of our islands, but the vastness of our oceans." So for this occasion, let me add, we shall not be defined by the smallness of our knowledge, but by the vastness of our ignorance. And I love the term in our, not of, in our ignorance, because we don't understand ourselves. So this lecture is a riff on that inscription. And what I try to teach my students in one way or another is, the more we know, the less we know. And some actually understand it. So let me turn, by the way, can you hear me in back? Thank you. This wonderful poster, but it has to disappear, and I don't know how to make it disappear. You are in charge of technology. That's the theory of technology. There we go. And that was the summary of the lecture. Okay, which was hidden by the other screen. I just leave it up there. Protean power, by the way, is not protein. Protein is very important, okay? It's important to eat it, but protein powers. And I didn't plan it that way. These 3 things, they grew out of my scholarship. Okay. So there you have it. So this is Entanglement, Ithaca and Sydney connected. It's an amazing, spooky action at a long distance, right? Actually, it's just plagiarism, okay? So we call it entanglement, but this is old-fashioned plagiarism. I copied the screen, the slide from James, but I asked him for permission, okay? So that's the outline of the lecture. So in my personal experience, I have always surprised myself that I'm basically wrong every time, okay? Give you one example, the falling of the Berlin Wall. Well, Germany, had 40 years of 40th anniversary in 1989. There were conferences all over. I was a German specialist, so I went to lots of conferences and talked. Nobody saw it coming, including myself, except one historian, Charlie Mayer at Harvard, who 6 months earlier said, "This reminds me of 1848, okay? The Black Monday, 2008, finance. I mean, I was shell-shocked as a German. I went into my first large lecture class and I said, terrible things will happen based on 1929. Obama gets elected, okay? And then the last election, November 24th, I was totally certain what was going to happen. I didn't know how the election would turn out. Nobody did. The swing states, 7 of them, they were evenly divided. I don't know. But I said the election is not going to be decided in November. It's going to be decided in January 6th. Wrong again. Okay. So I make this mistake all the time. But I'm not alone. Okay. I give you some politicians who get it wrong all the time. But introspection of about 2.5 seconds will tell you, you get it wrong all the time too. Okay. Why is that? So because we use two concepts, probability and possibility, and we make the category error of treating them as the same. Tucker Parsons, who was a famous sociologist, translates Max Weber's Economy and Society in 1927, I believe, has a little footnote. And he says, dear reader, if you read chance in this text, do not be misled to say that means probability. In German and for Weber, it meant both probability and possibility. The American social sciences didn't read the footnote. So my way of understanding the probability and possibility, I take a metaphor from Savage, who was a famous statistician, who writes a book in 1954 and says there's a small world and there's a big world. In the small world, I can tell you something about probability. But the large world, I have nothing to say, okay? So in the history of the last 70 years since he published, we overlook the world of uncertainty, all of us, for reasons which I have no clear answer to that. But I think we are uncomfortable with the concept of not being in charge. And there's the investor, Charlie Munger. I'm sure you know him. He died a couple of years ago. He says, it's like being a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. Okay. Or, of course, the one-eyed man and the elephant. This is better than being blind, but it's not as good as being two-eyed, okay? Knowing about risk and uncertainty. Nothing is certain but death and taxes. Benjamin Franklin is credited with all good quotes which ever made, okay? Other people have said it before him, but I'll quote Benjamin Franklin. And here's something from King James Bible. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, nor favor to men of skill, but time and chance happen to all of them. Death and chance probably happen to all of them. And then to bring it up to date to the current war, a tyrant falls, dangerous uncertainty begins. Really? Why are they dancing in the streets of Tehran? Uncertainty always has promise. So here is it, just to show you the intellectual decline of the United States. The Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, in a famous press conference before the Iraq War. And he gives a little lecture, okay? So he talks about risk and the domain of the known, can calculate the risks objectively or subjectively. He talks about uncertainty, okay? And the domain of the known unknowns. And then he talks about radical uncertainty, the domain of the unknown unknowns. And uninformed as I was, together with many other uninformed professors, I said, this is deliberate obfuscation, okay? Because what's he talking about? The war. We all knew the war was coming. It was not deliberate obfuscation. It was just a person who was much smarter than I was, who had been briefed, I assume, by somebody on his staff, okay? Now, our present Secretary of Defense does push-ups, okay? So that's probably one reason why these wars don't go so well for the United States. Donald Rumsfeld was not a political scientist. He didn't know that in order to get a Nobel Prize in political science, you have to have a 2x2, okay? So, but you can see that risk, quantified risk analysis, works in the small world. Radical uncertainty requires imagination and counterfactuals. It's where you can't say anything systematically. And then there are domains where risk and uncertainty flow into each other. Okay. So as an undergraduate, I was in Swarthmore College. It was like a PPE program. And we had to write a paper every week. It was always an all-nighter. You never got it done. And so we were exhausted. We wanted to have some fun. So at the end of the paper, you were producing doodles. This was my most successful doodle at Swarthmore College. Okay. And I didn't know then what I know now. This contains the deep truth central for this lecture. Okay. My advice is sample from both dishes. Don't restrict yourself to one or the other. Okay. In the interest of time, I think I will skip the numbers part. We'll just do context, process, and language, okay? So here is how to distinguish the small and the large world. One is, is the context the same or different? And the other one is, are the processes in the world invariant or variant? This is the domain of the fight intellectuals have had, professors, in the last 200 years between ideographic and nomothetic, qualitative and quantitative social science. That was pretty easy for me. What was hard for the conceptualization underlying this book and this lecture was how to think about language. Language, for most people in the social sciences, including in finance, is a mirror of reality. It mirrors, it presents. In the humanities and in politics, language represents. It's not representation, it's representation. There's agency there. That is, after all, how one convinces an audience. I'm trying to convince you with a certain kind of use of metaphors, examples. So here are then the ways I want to talk very briefly, based on the case studies in this book. The case study in the middle. My wife always said, well, you're writing all these books. Where's the meat? Okay, I said, okay, honey, here's going to be a book with a meat in it. Okay, so there's a chapter on finance, on nuclear war, and on the environment. So what about finance? Well, the financial crisis was freaked me out. It was totally surprising to everybody in finance, which was driven by the rational expectation theory, which was an ingenious simplification from the large world to the small world. People are assumed to be rational. Risk management models were instituted by the banks, and trillions of dollars of securitization created large asset bubbles and hundreds of billions of dollars of losses after the mortgage market crashed. Okay? How did this happen? How did one theory capture the imagination of all professors first and then all of Wall Street? That's a really interesting question. Turns out it became a social convention. Social conventions are there to stabilize expectations. Okay? Expectations which cannot be captured fully in the small world. So the social convention, this is a term from Lord Keynes, is a way of living with uncertainty. People are reasonable and not rational. So that led to a prize fight between Soros and Solow. Okay? Soros said, these guys are crazy. I didn't even read their stuff because it's utterly irrelevant. The real economy is not what's driving markets. I'm looking at traders. When they walk to the door, I go to the door too. Maybe I lead them to the door. Soros says, this guy doesn't know anything what he's talking about. He's uninformed, untutored. Solow is a brilliant Nobel Prize winning economist. Okay, it was two ships passing at night. One fully convinced it was a world of risk. The other one fully convinced that it was a world of risk and uncertainty. And Soros, by the way, had bleeding ulcers whenever he was betting big, like on the British pound. So if you look at accounting as a discipline, it is an act of counting, but it is also an interpretive art. So it's a mixture of manipulation and calculation. So the rational models were disastrously wrong. For the students in the audience, it disappeared here. There it is. That's how wrong they were at the middle of the distribution by about 35,000%. So our Cornell students, when they come in with their sophomores, with models which are off 35,000%, we say, try again, okay? The head of Goldman Sachs, chief financial officer, observes in August 2007, wild uncertainty. We were seeing things that were 25 standard deviations several days in a row. 25 standard deviations like 1 with 100 zeros, okay? It doesn't occur. You have to win I think you win the $1 million in your lottery 100 times in a row every day, right? So he was totally taken in by this. Let me talk about nuclear security. The Cuban Missile Crisis. It's a wonderful case to study because it is both so horrible and because we have excellent data, okay? So the deterrence theory, the thing which is supposedly keeping us safe, is that the closer you get to the abyss, the greater the caution. Because everybody realizes it's collective suicide, okay? Nuclear war, in that view, is a near impossibility. And the person inventing that theory, Thomas Schelling, a giant in economic analysis, Nobel Prize winning, right? Convinces himself of that. And everybody else. And he is stunned that the decision makers in the White, when the news breaks that the crisis is happening, he invites everybody to the Harvard Faculty Club for a free drink. He said, we've won. And then he finds out that his friends on the National Security Council and McNamara are scared shitless. Okay, and what's going on? He said, you guys ought to be celebrating. That is, the people in charge experienced the crisis totally differently from the modelers. Why? Because they knew instinctively, I think, and emotionally, that they were not just in a small world. So scholars have then looked at the 13 days in October 1962 quite carefully and found an enormous number of near misses. For example, organizational routines and the dispersion of human agency undermine the predictability that Schelling assumed, and they can lead to irrational and accidental war. One example is, that there was something happened on a base in Wisconsin. There seemed to be Russian agents climbing over the fence. The pilots rush onto the runway. The planes are ready to take off. And then somebody says, that's not Russian agent, that's a bear. Okay, the commander of the base races in his car the end of the runway to stop the fighters from taking off. Similar sort of things happened in 1983. Petrov, who's a Russian hero, saving us from World War III because of a misfunctioning of the Russian missile system. So several of these occur. When they are reported, and in the late 90s, late 1980s, there's a conference. McNamara is there, Fidel Castro is there, and they discuss it. And McNamara can't believe the wrong intelligence which they had. Yeah, he was, I am shocked, right? Yeah. After that, Science and Technology Studies, we have a distinguished member in the audience, is looking on the relations between people and objects. That is the assemblages of objects and organizations and human beings, okay? And they create their own unpredictabilities. So the president is not a quarterback, which is how the heroic story is. He's a mascot, okay? And somebody, James Blight and Larson, who wrote the best book on the Cuban Missile Crisis, called The Established Conventional Wisdom, which we all embrace, nothing but pure bullshit, okay? Global warming, okay? I knew very little about global warming 4 years ago, but I knew that my students, this is what motivates my students. That is what's in their heart and in their heads, okay? And I wanted to find out more about it so that I could understand it better. Well, there is a small world view of global warming, Earth system science, okay? The world is a set of noble ecosystems with calculable risks. And it makes sense that engineers and scientists develop this approach, because if in fact we don't solve the problem, plan A, doing something about it, will fail. You gotta have plan B. So they talk about various technologies to control global warming. They not only talk, these are being deployed on an experimental scale around Australia, around Cape Cod, in China, okay? This is happening globally, and it's accelerating. But nobody knows what would happen if they're deployed at scale. That's radical uncertainty, okay? So this is one take, and you can do it in marine and geoengineering, but you just don't know what the unintended and unanticipated consequences will be once these technologies are introduced at scale. There's a totally different view of global warming, the Anthropocene, and the uncertainties which are operating in both human and geological time. Humans have become geological agents. The volcano in Hawaii is spewing, among other things, plastic, okay? That is a radical change, okay? That is, we have created profound endogenous effects on basic physical processes. It's not that it's out there. It's not an external diseconomy. This is where economics dealt with this, right? So the rise of Asia, which in the last 30 years has revolutionized the world, is of course revolutionizing global warming. And the people who are going to pay the price for it mostly will be the precarious populations in Asia, okay? So that is a totally different set of uncertainties, the merging of geological and human time. And it's our parochialism, that is our unwillingness and inability to imagine living not only in human time, but in geological time, having become geological agents very recently, okay, that accelerates this uncertainty. It's a large world. And then language models and artificial intelligence. It is an incredible development. It's now 70 years old, Turing. I mean, for me personally, only 3 years old, but I'm stupid, okay? Turing was smart, okay? 70 years, but the acceleration Now, the amount of money corporation put in, I mean, the data which I cite there from 2 years ago are totally around by an order of magnitude already in terms of billions of dollars invested. And it's global, okay? These machines hallucinate, just like us, okay? Do they lie or do they tell bullshit? If you lie, you know the difference between truth and falsehood. And you lie because you want to get an advantage. If you tell bullshit, you don't know the truth. And we are entering an era where bullshitting will become the standard, not lying. That's a totally dramatic change in a basic technology, basic human technology of communication, okay? Now, artificial intelligence is very important, but we of course also have artificial stupidity, okay? And America is leading in that department, okay? Our president is making great gains in AS. It is impossible to distinguish his lying from his bullshitting. Total uncertainty, okay? Language. I'm trying to convince you, I'm not mirroring the world. I'm world making, right? So the notion that language conveys information, which is all the people in economics believe that, okay? Or language is an active instrument are two very different ways of thinking about language. Of course, in humanities, it's totally reasonable to say language is active. You represent the world, you make stuff up, right? But in physics, does the world really talk Aristotelian or Newtonian or quantum physics? Or do we tell different stories in different languages? In international relations, is world politics really an anarchy, which is why we teach it to our freshmen? Or is it a hierarchy? That's our choice. We tell different stories. So we tell stories with concepts we choose. And those stories generate a discourse that shapes us all and that we shape. Let me give a couple of examples. So when I finished that first book, Protein Power, I traveled, and that's what professors do. They get invited, like they get invited here, and large lectures, small seminars, it didn't matter. There were over 20 of them. Every time, the same first question. I was stunned, okay? And the question was this: Professor Katzenstein, what you're telling is really interesting. As to say, are you crazy? Okay, let me translate it into my own language. And that language, unfailingly, was Newtonian. Okay, that is about 150 years out of place. Same reaction to the book, which I just finished, these empirical chapters. They all sort of have the same structure, in finance and nuclear war and global warming. I start with the small world, I move to the larger world, and then I move to a mixture of both worlds. Each chapter has that structure, okay? And I got a lot of reactions from colleagues and friends who read it and said, listen, that part of the chapter, very good. That part of the chapter, I don't understand what you're saying. That is, they couldn't get either the small world or the large world argument. Typically, they couldn't get the large world argument. But some did the large world argument, but couldn't get the small world argument, okay? So these chapters make more or less sense depending on something, okay? So I think that something is what some people call tacit knowledge, which I call worldviews. And in fact, the reaction to the Power book led me to write a book on worldviews, which is a concept which not many people are interested in, okay? So are we as scientists not telling stories? And the best economists know that they're telling stories. The guy who invented Lukács, who invented rational expectation model, said, I'm a storyteller. And he convinced everybody, not just professors. He convinced all of Wall Street. A very powerful story. bringing down the house. So cameras represent, they take a picture, and social sciences now do this with survey experiments and field experiments, and capture the small world. Engines represent the world. This distinction is from a sociologist in Scotland, Mackenzie. And they do it with thought experiments and counterfactuals. Narration, telling stories, is a combination of both. Now, in the social sciences, the cutting edge is focusing on stories, which they call random narratives. David Layton is a friend of mine. You want to avoid the cardinal sin. If there's students here, don't do this. Selection bias. It's like making love to your mother. Don't do it, okay? Sampling on the dependent variable. It's a terrible thing to do, okay? So David says, I learned most from studying civil wars in Japan, something that didn't happen, okay? It's a sophisticated way to impose order on a chaotic data set, to make the world look small and controllable. It engages in what Taleb calls the narrative fallacy. Taleb is a guy on Wall Street, okay, written wonderful books on black swans, things are very improbable, and anti-fragility, how to make money on things that are uncertain. Why the narrative fallacy? It disregards the hidden and abstract non-events that make the world large. Our imagination is not large enough to capture the things which didn't happen. So theories abstract away from the world. You test a theory to find out whether it's true or not. Models, which is what chancellors like to have, are navigational tools. You test drive a model, you don't test it. Make sure it works. So in one world, you argue if then. That's the small world, hypothesis testing. In the large world, you think what if, you think like a child. So in finance, give you one example, talking to markets. If you want to become a central banker, over the last 30 years, the consensus has become, forget about interest rates, talk. Talk out of both sides of your mouth. And Greenspan was a world champion at that, okay? The oracle at the Fed, he was called. In one of his speeches, he says, if you think you understood what I said, you didn't hear me clearly, okay? Deterrence. What do we call the Cuban Missile Crisis, okay? Well, in America, it's called the Cuban Missile Crisis. In Moscow, it's called the Caribbean Crisis. It's not about Cuba. It is about stabilizing the Caribbean by supporting your ally and diminishing the relative superiority of the American nuclear strike force. In Cuba, it's not called that either, okay? In Cuba, it's the October crisis. And it's not 13 days for Cubans. It's over 100 years. It's still going on, by the way, okay? Which was one of the reasons why Fidel Castro said, let's blow up the whole world. And Khrushchev said, are you crazy? We're going to solve this thing. He says, no, this is going on for so long. Let's get the bastards, okay? Nuclear talk, nuke speak, is designed by the specialist to make the nuclear war intelligible, that we think it's a war we can grasp and understand, okay? The power of language to convince us. And then in large language models and augmented intelligence, it's a revolutionary change. I should have retired. I like teaching. It makes everything different in the classroom. And many professors say, oh, you come and write your blue books and by hand so they know you're not cheating. I say, you can't do that. Everybody uses it. You've got to prepare them for that world. And the basic message is, don't use it as an answer machine or use it only Thursday night when you want to go out and dance. But for the rest of the week, use it as a study buddy. Improve the questions which you pose to the world, okay? And for that, it's extremely useful because most of the time our questions are lousy and then we get lousy answers. We are not intervening in the world with this technology. We are part of it. We are intravening, okay, in one of our most fundamental cultural technologies. I'm going to skip this because we are running out of time. So here are the theories. And why are we so often wrong? Because of something underneath the theories and the models and the methods. Something we never really are aware of. I call it worldviews, okay? We take for given Newtonian humanism. And Newtonian humanism is incoherent intellectually, which is very important. It provides the space on which different theories and models can breathe and be developed. So the post-Newtonian and parahumanism are alternatives. And they emerge from the development in the natural sciences in the 20th century. They are more accepting of uncertainty and the complementarity of risk and uncertainty than is Newtonian humanism. So the problem with my discipline, world politics, or the social science in general, is they're just a mere 150 years out of date. Here's the use of the concepts. No worldviews, you can see it's just on the x-axis, and nobody looks at that. There are two theorists who did this early in the 20th century, Dilthey and Weber. So here's Einstein and Niels Bohr, the two giants for the entire generation. The man, if I could be born again, I would either, Brennan isn't bad, want to become a Khan and play squash in Pakistan, okay? Or be part of this generation of physicists. So they open up an invisible world governed by uncertainty and randomness. They take their philosophical inspirations from the 19th century, the philosophy of relationalism, to make sense out of new data. Okay, quantum uncertainties. And what they come up with, the world is not a causal machine, but a creative generator of unfolding potentialities, which the fold always changes all the time. The reality is created by the physicist, by the measurement argumentative practices of the observer. There's a big disagreement among physicists whether language is part of this or not. Since I'm trying to convince you, I'll just say language is part of it. But many physicists agree it's language. Karen Barat, for example, okay? So this contradicts conventional notions of objectivity. That's post-Newtonianism. Entanglement, yes. And life becomes an iterative evolution of space-time. So the relational universe is teeming with possibilities. And here is the brilliance of physicists, that they capture with ingenious experiments so that the efficient cause can be isolated. That's the brilliance of it. So quantum physics is a marvel of predictive accuracy, okay? And very practical, revolutionizing. And it has revolutionized world politics and will in the future. Parahumanism, I give you two examples, Donna Haraway and Lee Smolin. It doesn't replace humanism. It goes around and beyond humanism in its various forms, eco-cosmo or machine-centered. Natural sciences and biology or geology or cosmology have established that the world is a heap of deeply entangled life forms. So there's a lot of intelligence and agency in the world, and we are not the monopolists of those. So what evolves from this is a multi-species and more than human ethics that is attentive to this. And the museum to which I went this morning has lots of great examples of that, okay? And the Aborigines, like in North America, are fully aware of it. We are just beginning to catch up, waking up from our Newtonian slumbers. So there's no easy distinction between the objects of the natural world, which we think are deanimated and inert, and stripped of all actions, and the subjects of the human world, which are over-animated and endowed with souls and consciousness and supposedly free. You know, Latour, who is a brilliant social anthropologist in France who died recently, you know, gives the example of the creation of penicillin. He said, was it Alexander Fleming, you know, who went on a vacation for 3 weeks? Or was it the mold, which was growing on that Petri dish, right? And he says, no, they were co-produced. It was both, right? Winnie the Pooh, it's not either or, it's both and. So systems for Donna Haraway lack spatial and temporal boundaries. They're systems of complex entanglements by distributed components. We are not self-contained. We are parts of us inside us, bacteria and viruses, trillions of them, and they're plants and animals and other humans and possibly even extraterrestrial beings around us. That's parahumanism. Let me conclude. Okay, I'm trying to convince you, you got to sample both dishes, okay? So the conundrum of risk and uncertainty cannot be avoided. And the principle of complementarity out of quantum physics says, when the world is contradictory, Bohr's conclusion, you accept the contradiction and you hope that through science and better understanding, it will be resolved in the future. So when he was asked whether he wanted milk or honey, Winnie the Pooh said that he wanted both, okay? Both and always wins over either or. You know these pictures, okay? By the way, the probability that it's a duck is much higher in April, and the probability that it's a rabbit for the observers is much higher in the hunting season in the fall, okay? Seeing is, according to Wittgenstein, is perception. And seeing as is interpretation. There's fact and freedom. And we choose what to see, duck or rabbit. And we can negate that choice helplessly because we are drawn to one picture or the other, or willfully, knowing that there are two pictures, we choose one. And that's what we're doing with the risk uncertainty conundrum. We do it in order to keep the theories which we like or the models which work. We stick with Newtonian humanism. What's the normative implication of the argument? They're policemen and they're firefighters, okay? Policemen are optimistic. They want to create order. Firefighters are pessimistic. They want to dedicate their lives to harm mitigation. Camus was a firefighter. He who dedicates himself to history dedicates himself to nothing, and in turn is nothing. But he who dedicates himself to the duration of his life, to the house he builds, to the dignity of mankind, dedicates himself to the earth and sustains the world again and again and again. So when I talk to people on what I'm talking about, risk and uncertainty, they say, oh, you're talking about uncertainty. I know that. It is impossible to begin to learn that which you think you already know. When you have worked with something and it works really, really well, Greenspan said, my worldview was shattered, but for 40 years it really worked really well. Never will man penetrate deeper into error than when he's continuing on a road which has led him to great success, right? That's a story of science, often as a very conservative attitude towards life. Beware of the terrible simplifiers, for sure. Yeah, that's also true. Okay. So I didn't want to tell you what to think. I wanted to tell you what to think about. Thank you.
Well, I think we have a lot to think about. And before we get into it, I think we should deal with the elephant in the room. Not Trump 2, but also Trump 1 and uncertainty. We are facing incredible uncertainty right now. And we faced it in 2016. In 2017, we had actually a forum on uncertainty. Some of the people in the audience were there and we wrestled with it, but we didn't get nearly as deep as the lecture today. But we thought we had a good start on it. And yet here we are again. So the question I have is, what happens when certainty and uncertainty, mainly in this case, uncertainty, gets weaponized? This global forum in 2017, we actually looked at global, the Google searches, 2 words, or actually 3 words, Trump and uncertainty. 31 million hits. It's higher. So what happens when, an individual or institution generates these uncertainties and their advantage?
Well, I mean, that figure is really surprising, 31 million. That means people are a whole lot smarter than I am.
Well, they're wondering, they're asking questions, why?
He makes his career to be the disruptor and to the creator of uncertainty. That he does extremely well. The other thing really as well as media. He is an heavy user. So the weaponization is part of it. You can weaponize by being very certain and kill hundreds of millions of people. We've had that in the 20th century. You can weaponize it by uncertainty. So I think he is a man for his time. He is what. Aha. Good. So you didn't hear anything I said. That's fun.
The acoustics are good. This is more for, we're taping this for.
I see. Okay. So he is a man for this time. So today's article by Tom Friedman, it is the most plastic, unpredictable moment in the Middle East since the Iranian Revolution of 1979. Everything and its opposite is possible. You couldn't have a more ringing endorsement of uncertainty and quantum than that. So what Trump is doing and what's happening in the world, man matches world. The question is, how do we cope with it? Okay? And uncertainty, as I say always to myself, don't forget Nixon in Beijing. Out of ill and evil, good things can happen. Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to just read the opening line from your book. An imaginary knowledge of the perfect truth is how, in War and Peace, Tolstoy characterizes General Fuhl's belief in science. That was the general for fighting for against Napoleon. For Fuhl, the idea of war guides the conduct of war. And when war does not conform to the idea, it is the war and not the idea that is to blame. Some would call this the Mike Tyson theory, that when you get punched in the face, every plan goes out the window. What the relationship between models and reality has proven to be our downfall. Often when a model does not conform to reality, we stick to the model, to our great misfortune. Does your assemblage offer a way out of that conundrum, the risk uncertainty?
Well, I mean, the map is not the territory, right? I want to find out how to get in Sydney around fast. I buy a subway map. I want to find a restaurant. I don't want a subway map. I want a street map. You just got to know what you want. So that's our choice. And the human agency, the purposes which we have in understanding the world. In liberal arts for students, it's to learn how to think. It's really important. That's why I'm a teacher. You create consciousness. At first, they don't know anything. And then suddenly the light bulb goes on. And you're in the process of creating a thinking human being. Very exciting. but it's the purpose which we bring to life. And it depends, but many times the map is mistaken as a territory. And that's because we like order and control. And we got to accept the messiness of life, not all of it. I have the metaphor of, I'd like to live in a park, okay? I don't want to rake the forest, that makes no sense, okay? But I accept that there's a messiness in the world, and which I can't do anything about. And I think we all do it in some form in our private lives. If we don't, I think we're pretty unhappy, okay? But it's true for collectivities and for states.
I have some other questions too, but I think I'd really like to hear from the audience. So why don't we take a couple of questions? We have somebody who, this is mainly, we're videotaping this, we'll be posting it. So if you could use the mic, it would be great. Anybody want to jump in with, yes, we have one there. Dean of our law school.
Professor Katzenstein, scale seems to play a big role in your thinking.
Say that again.
Scale
Yeah.
seems to. So how do we adjust scale for uncertainty? We know from the humanities that the tiny contains vast universes. Possibly Trump may be actually quite tiny, and we may be, maybe a symptom rather than a cause. How do we allow for the things that we think are big, large, actually being small, and vice versa?
A great question. I think it depends on our intellectual versatility and our imagination, and dare I say, empathy. Okay. So a friend of mine was wrote a brilliant book on cause, Amelia Cookie, and she reports, that one day she was just sort of flicking off the spider, killing it, in the bathroom. And her partner said, "What the hell are you doing?" Okay. Convincing her later on that spiders are very useful beings and you ought to put it in a little jar and put it outside. I was like Amelia. And when she told me the story, I stopped killing spiders in my bathroom. So it depends on different kinds of intelligence, which we need to cultivate as we grow. Okay. And many of the young actually have a kind of intelligence which older people don't have or have lost. So older people have other kinds of intelligence. I think it's a complementarity between the two, right?
Other observations, questions? Remember, your questions and observations are helping to make the world, so make them good ones. Back there.
Coming to you.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting distinction that you're making between risk and uncertainty. I kind of wanted to ask you if you've thought about this at all in the context of prediction markets becoming such a big thing, and even in maybe IR, that there's, now right now probably millions of dollars going on. Is Iran going to capitulate? Is various things like this. Risk has seemingly been, quantified in this really particular way. Do you see that as a positive trend, or are we missing something by doing this?
No, we're not missing. We are trying to cope. So there are people who are saying, can we get into the risk uncertainty world, the conundrum, and measure it? So let's say in Munich Re, it's a reinsurance company. I think they have 2,000 statisticians. What do? They price products on which side of the risk uncertainty boundary they are. Okay? That's what reinsurance industry does. If you are like Phil Tedlock, who is a colleague at the University of Pennsylvania, he says, can I train judges of risk and uncertainty? So he has hired 2,000 people or so and asked them predict what's going to happen. Okay? And he finds that on average, they don't do better than average forecasting. Okay? That would be the wisdom of the crowd, your prediction market, right? But he says there are individual traits. There's great variation in the judges themselves. And he has identified a portfolio of intellectual capabilities that make you a good expert. For example, you don't have a pet theory, you know, or you keep up with the data, right? And he's now testing this over 10 years, right? So there are ways of doing it. Somebody else, Bernadette Mesquita, has a game theoretic model and uses expert judges, area, no people know this particular area in Yemen or wherever it is, and says, that gives me a very high confidence. He says 90% of the time I'm right. He's consulted for the CIA a lot. And I said, Bruce, I know it's proprietary, you can't tell me anything, but if you're right, American policy ought to be better than it is, all right? So I don't know, he's now writing a book and he's debating, should he release his method, okay? Tedlock and Bernadette Mesquita agree that you can peer into the future, maybe 3 years, maybe 4 years, but not longer, okay? So fun, you can have great fun reading books which become bestsellers, like I remember, The Coming War with Japan, published in 1990, okay? A great book. I'm still waiting, okay? So yes, there are prediction models. Are the data, large data, the solution to the problem? No. But it's clear that on average, if you wanted to get better than Mr. Friedman with The Coming War of Japan, you take all the people writing those books, put them together, take the average, you'll be better off than trusting any one of them. So I believe there is a wisdom of the crowd, okay? But it's not getting around the conundrum. It's poking into the fog. And poking into the fog is very important, okay? If you live in this world, if you can make a little bit more sense of it, so much the better.
We're seeing particularly in America, we're sort of living in like a post-truth era, and our orthodox ways of understanding and knowledge is being largely thrown in the bin. Do you think that Donald Trump is a symptom or a cause of that? When we see things, for example, like anti-vaxxers becoming less and less of a minority and seeing measles outbreaks, for example, how much of a role is Trump playing in orchestrating it? Or
don't have anti-vaxxers in Australia?
We do, but not to the same extent as America at the moment.
Just give it a few years. You certainly have them in Germany and in Europe, right? So I think he's a symptom. He's not the cause. And the whole notion, give you an example, I emailed the other day from a cousin of mine in Germany, you know, he's my age. And he said, can you see this? It was a video. He said, a kid in his neighborhood had a photograph of himself and his mother. My aunt actually died a few years ago when she was 90, okay? And he made it into a video, only about 10 seconds. It was unbelievably stunning and scary. Give that 3 to 5 years, whatever election you're gonna have, and you don't know what happened. That's the new merging of the virtual with the real. That's the world we're coming. So the notion, what is truth and untruth, what is bullshit, all of this we'll have to somehow relearn. So it's not artificial intelligence, it's augmented intelligence. When I was in high school, they invented the electronic desk calculator, the little machine, right? Well, my math teacher said, that's the end of civilization. And I said, really? That struck me as extremely stupid, right? So here we are, electronic desk calculators no longer rock the world in Germany among math teachers. And I'm pretty sure we'll adapt, but we haven't a clue how we will adapt. Right now, we're just frightened, right? But we're smart. So Albert Hirschman talks about not the invisible hand, he talks about the hiding hand. So you get started with a job because you think you're smart and you can do it, and then you realize You're not that smart. But you can't stop. You have to figure things out. And that is how innovation and change happens. So I think you have to have a fairly strong belief in what we can do, which is why I'm a teacher. The next generation is our hope. It's not us.
Sorry, guys.
A few weeks ago, Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, made his speech at Davos, and one of the lines really stuck with me. It was something along the lines of, you know, the world order has ruptured.
Right.
How do we think about that? I mean, it is quite a scary concept, especially, you know, literally the whole discussion today has been about uncertainty. I mean, how do we look at this going forward in
what
terms?
is you, rupture, world, or order? No, which one? You mean the rupture scares you?
Rupture.
Rupture.
Yeah.
Okay. So you think this is a rupture, as Mr. Carney does? I think it was a good speech. But in my reading, from my perspective, the world got ruptured in 2008. Okay. So that is when that decade, 2 decades of saying, oh, this is a new world, ended. Okay. So I think we come to the point of rupture, historical transformation from particular experiences. I don't think it's for Canada totally understandable to say that this is a rupture. Germany too. I mean, they're totally disoriented, right? But I think that we look at it from different positionalities. And mine certainly says, no, it's not a rupture. This happened a long time ago, which is why I think this financial crisis, it was a great recession. It was not a Great Depression. Why? Because economists and the bankers had learned. Bernanke made all the mistakes before, but he was a student of the financial crisis, and he made all the right moves afterwards. Okay, it was a magnificent crisis management. He had learned. So in that sense, ruptures or transformations, they enforce learning and adaptation. And I'm an optimist. We'll manage.
I would just add that speech was probably exhibited the most quantum thinking I've ever seen. It was full of complementarities. It wasn't either or, but both and. And in some ways, your conclusion to your book, but also the use of some existentialists to end your talk, like Camus, is to recognize human qualities, human character is good and bad, but what can we do to encourage the good, to minimize the awfulness? And what I got from the ending of your book, but also the talk, is compassion, empathy. What Tolstoy called a severe compassion is so important. So I wanted to thank you for that, for giving us not just simply a dry analytical speech, but showing how important this, the holistic element of our being is necessary if we're going to find something less awful in the future. So thank you very much for that. So I have a few people to thank. Excuse me. The Sydney Nano Institute, there's our co-sponsors, the Chowchuk Wing Museum. We want to thank them for a really well-run show. And my PhD students, who once again, forced labor, for helping us out today. And Janet, so Carrie Bell, who stepped up to make this event possible. And lastly, Professor Katzenstein, for shedding light and giving us hope, I think, in a time of really dark fears and great uncertainties. And so I want to thank you for that. So peace and good night, and thank you all for coming out. Thank you all.